All right, I'm going to make this little debugging walkthrough just to kind of make some comments that aren't important to this particular problem, but just kind of laying out some thoughts. So I've downloaded a file and a script as given to me. Now the script is in .rmd format, which is really nice for when you want to communicate stuff. But the actual structure they've been following is much more along the lines of, well, just a bare .r script. So let me really quickly, I think that I've already modified this version. So let me copy from my downloads folder. What was it? It was something.rmd. Here we go. Regression to here. All right. So let's go ahead and open up this as I got it. The data is as I got it. And I started to go through it, but decided to stop and record this whole process. What have we got? So like I said, we got this stuff that, is really kind of more along the lines of what you'd see in just a bare R script. So I'm just going to save it like that for now. Where you'd really be using the .rmd is when you're kind of doing some stuff and then talking through it. So actually a lot of the stuff we could just take Control C. Actually, I should really cut that. Control X. Let's put in a new code block, and there we go. So here you can start laying out your argument, talk about what you are writing about, explain where your data's from, and then you introduce stuff as you need to. But let's leave that aside. That's an interesting thing, but I'm going to focus on the code itself here. So I'm just going to treat this chunk of code that I pulled out of that RMD file as though it was just a bare R script. So right off the bat, we got a few things here that are commands that you absolutely should be running while you are doing this process, but that you don't want in your script itself. So think of the script as the artifact you're creating in the process of coding an R session, right? So here you're trying to set up this model, and you're going to do stuff while you're doing that. You're going to import some data, you're going to twist it, you're going to look at the head and the tail of it, you're going to check the dimensions of it. But as you do that, what you want to put together is the script that captures the essential logic of what you're doing. For this reason, I actually really kind of like the idea of using a program like Open Broadcast Studio, OBS, and recording your coding session, because there's a lot of things that are part of that process that you don't really want to save, like scratch paper, right? You work through a problem, you draw out some stuff on the back of an envelope, and then you throw out that envelope. So your .r file really should be the most essential stuff, but you do want to be doing this stuff as you go, right? So this is code that is important to know, but it is very unlikely to make it into your program, right? Which is ultimately what we're making. So I'm going to delete those things. In this case, get working directory, set working directory is telling me something about a problem not related to the code, but related to how you're interacting with R and RStudio. So what I've got here is a folder I've just created just for this video I'm making right now, dealing with this debugging session. So I'm being pretty explicit about dealing with this project, let's say, relatively professionally. like a 4 out of 5 on my professionalism scale, right? How seriously am I dealing with this? So I've given it a new folder. I've created an R project. So I go File, New Project, yada, yada, yada. Get this all set up, and it's all in one folder. So when I'm in this file, right, or this R script version that we're making here, this is all existing in the same folder. So when I look for something in this folder, it's right there, right? So I can go tab autocomplete on script0.r. I'm not even in a function. That's great that that works. If I go R underscore and hit tab, it auto fills in with this file because this file is in my working directory, right? So you can see I hit get working directory and I'm right where I need to be, and where I need to be is also where all of the stuff that I need is, right? It's all bundled up nicely. Now, a big complex project, you might have subfolders and things might get a little bit more complicated, but just as a general expectation, when you are working in an R project, you should be thinking in folders, right? You try to organize all your stuff into one relevant folder, and your code and your data are both in that same place. Now, that's not always going to be what you're going to do, but at least as an economist, it's going to work for you most of the time. Certainly for undergrad capstone, you want to have these separate folders and you want them all to be basically self-contained. Like I said, bigger projects, you want to be doing things a little bit differently, but for where you're at. All right, now we've got a whole bunch of libraries we're bringing in here. Let me show you a package I learned about recently, which is Pacman, which has this really nice function for handling all of this stuff, loading in all of these libraries. So we can give it a list of the libraries we want and it will load it. And even better than that, it will install anything that isn't already installed. Let me show you another really cool library besides this that will wrap up a lot of what you care about, which is the tidyverse. So when I go library tidyverse, it's going to import ggplot2, tidyr, readr, stringr. It's bringing in a lot of what you've got here, right? So I don't need that, I don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. Oh, that was in there twice anyways. But now I'm importing a bunch of these libraries that I care about with much less text. Now let me show you Pacman, which you would need to do install.packages Pacman. But once you've got it, then I can say I want tidyverse, I want ggalley, ggthemes, all these other things. I'm actually not going to load all these in because you're not using them yet. So I'm going to try and bring in as little as I need. I think I'm also trying to see what we're missing. So TS is from the stats package, which is loaded in by default. And I'm pretty sure if we go to here and check for stats, we're going to find that's already checked. That's good. I want to see TSLM. I think that TSLM. Forecast. All right. Are we loading in forecast? Maybe that'll solve the problem. I know it's forecast. This deals with factors, not forecast, which is where we're getting TSLM. All right, so I definitely want tidyverse. I definitely want forecast. I don't need ggplot2 because that's in tidyverse or dplyr or readr or this. Lubridate is a great package, but I'm just going to, well, actually, let's see. What am I going to do? I'm going to replace all of library open parenthesis with a comma. within the selection. And then I'm going to replace all closing parentheses with nothing, and actually closing parentheses slash new line. Let's see, now the new line's not getting picked up, whatever. All right. So if I go Pac-Man, load. Oh, whoops, I've got that. So then I just go put all this together. So now I've got one line that does what you did in a bunch of lines. It doesn't change anything at all about how this loads, and it does require an annoying thing, which is that the person using this install Pac-Man. But let me see what I can do with the minimal amount here. So another comment. You've got this big long list of libraries, and they kind of gather up at the top, and it's really easy to do that. And it's not the worst thing in the world, but it does mean that technically you're adding complexity into your script. So when something goes wrong, maybe it's something to do with grid extra, but I'm not seeing us actually using anything from that library down here. So I'm going to avoid adding that into this list of libraries until I actually need to, right? Until we actually use it. You picking up Ted on the microphone? Hey, Ted. I'll come feed you in a little bit, okay? You're being very good, Lola. It's good that you're not attacking the cat. Hey, Ted, come on over here. Sorry, I'm also managing the house full of critters. All right, next line, right? We still haven't even gotten near to the problem that we're looking for. Okay, it's only been 12 minutes. That's not too bad. So, loading in the CSV, again, since we have the CSV in our folder, we don't need to go to a specific place. So this line of code is something that will work on your computer, but when you share your work with someone else, they have to go through and change your code, which means they have to know where to change your code, which means they can't just hit Control-Shift-Enter and have everything run, right? Control-Shift-Enter is the hotkey to just run the entire script. So what I get to do is, and actually let me also point out another thing, which is the name of the file that you're referring to is not the same as the name of the file that you gave me. It's an easy thing to do, but just be cognizant of it. All right, let's take a quick look at what's in that file. All right, all this stuff in upper caps, all caps, that's good. This looks pretty good. This shouldn't give us any problems. Ted, you want to come sit in my lap? Come on, Lola, you leave Ted alone. Ted's a nice boy. It's good. You just sit down. All right. Actually, let's see. That's Lola down there acting on something. All right. Is this freezing? Whatever. Let's get back to work. So we're going to load in the file we want. Good. Again, this is sort of vestigial code, stuff that kind of doesn't really need to be in your script, stuff that we would absolutely be running down here a bunch in the process of checking out what we've got. So I'm going to just take a look at the structure here. At the old school way of doing this would be to say, let's check structure on Final 490. We've got that up here in our studio, which is nice. So date, I'm going to just take an extra step here and add a mutate. So you haven't been using this in your code, but this is a pipe. This is a nice little way to chain together steps. The other way to do that would be to write the mutate function around what we've got. So you'd say, let's mutate the result of this function. We're going to do a thing. What the pipe lets me do is instead say, let's load in this data and let's pipe it into mutate. So mutate wants me to have something to mutate, and what I want to mutate is this. And what I want to do with it is I want to try and set date equals as dot date of date. Oh, Jesus. Leave the poor cat alone. He's allowed to be here. My office, not yours. All right, let's see what happens. Cool. Doesn't look like anything weird has happened. We still have 134 observations. This is all quarterly, right? 147, 147. All right, cool. I think this is fine. That's a good boy, Ted. Okay. They'll chill out when I give Ted his afternoon food. That can wait. All right, so what have I done here? I've added a little bit of code so that now when I run this, I import the file, and then I change date to be a date file, a date column, as opposed to a character column. So it was coming in as text, but now when I look at it, I'm getting a date. So that is nice. That is going to make life a little bit easier. So I wonder what would happen if we just said final 490. Let's pipe that into TS and see what we get. Let's see what the head of that is. Get a date minus 719144. 719144 minus 718049. 1095. That's not right. Okay, so sometimes you can do stuff nicely, but whatever. So, right, we can do stuff with these pipes. I'd recommend if you go to just tidyverse.org, they'll usually kind of have a vignette, a sort of code walkthrough. And if you go through that, actually, I guess we could even find this by looking at the documentation from magrittr. Assignment pipe. I got to remember to check this out again later. Magrittr. Rene Magritte is one of my favorite of the Belgian surrealists. So it's nice to see this package named after him. All right, forget about that. Let's get to your problem, because now I'm getting bogged down in details and I'd rather not go too far over 20 minutes. So we're loading this in. I think that this is going to be perfectly fine. Let's check ahead of that. So we've got this, and we can see from the column names, we're looking at Q2 2020. Let's just check the tail of FinProj. Oh, I changed that. Sorry, not FinProj. Tail of Final 490. Okay, cool. So this looks like it did what it's supposed to. Right, we're getting that detail. So TS is treating that, it's moving that date into the row name, which is a little bit weird, but that's how that library works. So, you know, if you want to use their library, you got to play by their rules. Cool, so this looks good. Although, let me just check that again. So if I look at final 490, the head is 19. Let's look at that data again. I'm just feeling a little bit paranoid about losing something. 187. All right, cool. So I haven't changed very much. I've changed some organization, and as a result, we can get rid of a couple lines of code. This handy dandy library, Pacman, lets me move a bunch of lines onto one, but also tidyverse lets me save a bunch of those libraries to import. But also, I'm going to try and avoid bringing in vestigial libraries. Libraries that you use, that you copied from some other script into here, that maybe is being used in the code, but maybe not. I'm just going to try and keep it sparse, just to make it a little bit easier to see where we might have problems. All right. We have created this time series object. So another quick comment is just, again, this is like a style aesthetic thing, but it helps. It helps with keeping organized to have well-named things. And we've talked about this in an email about consistently naming your variables. So we might think about how we name this stuff here. So I'm going to kind of put what feels a little bit more natural to me. I'm going to change stuff as we go. So final 490, that feels like the project, but not the thing within the project, which is just the data. So I'm going to call this data. I'm also going to do another thing. Here's just a little life hacky type suggestion. So this line of code clears everything off the workspace. And I like to put that at the top of my script because I will feel like I know what's going on with my script if I can hit Control-Shift-Enter. It will then run through the entire script for me and will either work or not. Right? So in this case, it didn't work because we've got this problem that we had solved by email, which that needs to be surrounded by backticks. But by doing this, what I'm doing is I'm making sure that as I solve problems, I get them encapsulated in the script itself, so that when I pass the script off to someone else, they can just run it and it will just work. But if it doesn't work, you know, the less stuff we have in here, the easier it will be to find what is there. Right? So think of the script as sort of crystallizing your view on this process going from the data you start with to what it is you're finally trying to get out of this, which maybe is a model or a prediction or a visualization. So this is one part along the way. This is the data. So I've got to fix this here. This is also going to be the data. And then I'm just going to call this data_ts. I like to use the underscores when I'm naming variables. That's just my preference, purely aesthetic. So when we run through this, clear everything, load in our libraries, load in the data. And in this case, we've modified the data so that we've got that date column. Let's just check out what the data looks like. Did we mess up the years here? This isn't from 19. Let's go data arrange by date. Descending by date. All right. You know what? Since we're using the time series package anyways, I'm going to get rid of this. Something in here didn't work. If this had worked nicely, and you know what? This is going to drive me nuts. Let me really quickly solve this. I'm going to bring in lubridate. I should probably have spaces here to make it a little easier to read. All right, so now I'm loading in lubridate, and lubridate has this really handy thing, which we can say month, day, year on date. And I think it will parse that correctly. There we go. So the date 1987, January 1st, April 1st, and so on. So now, if we're doing anything to do with this panel data, these time series, and we're not using TS, TS is trying to set up the data to do certain things within that library a certain way. But it is nice, since we know that this should be a date, to have it something that R will identify as a date. So what this little bit of code did, this is super handy to know. Anytime you got data, it'll often come in this format, some unpredictable format. Maybe it's day, month, year, maybe it's year, month, day, maybe it's separated with underscores or whatever, right? It's formatted in some inconsistent fashion, and you want to convert it into some standard fashion, something where R says this is a date, right? And this is the standard fashion. But if you're getting it in some other format, you and I easily see this as October 1st, 1987. But R just sees text, right? But if we can have a general pattern of, in this case, it's month, day, year, or if we had year, day, month, or something else, we could do YDM for year, day, month, which is built into Lubridate, and then there's ones for time. Really cool little handy thing. That's what I said, month, day, year. So we're throwing this away, but hey, we got it. All right, load in our data. We create our time series data. We got to update this, be consistent. I'm going to put this on a separate line just to make it a little easier to see. I know what's going on here. Look at the names of our data. This is our column names. Student loans, we don't have anymore. I think you said you called that SD. Now, another general thing to point out here is our Dolphin brains just fill in gaps so automatically. For all the silly things people do, as processors of information, we are pretty amazing. The things that our brains are good at are really kind of incredible. The computer is not nearly so good at that. So this was just like a blind spot in my brain. That was not what it was supposed to be, because we had solved that problem by email before. Let's see if it works. It works. Awesome. Here we got another thing where we're calling on something that doesn't exist. But let me also just say, on labeling, naming our things, so be consistent with that. It'll make it easier to stay organized. Now check this. Here's a little example, again, of something I just showed you that I really like. So I ran through with final fit, and then I said, you know what, I actually want to call this model underscore 0, because this is the first model I've looked at here. If I'm doing more models, I'd really like to at least try and keep track of them. So I reran it, but now I've got this old thing here, final fit, but final fit doesn't exist anywhere in this script. So it might be the case that you're going further on and you need to say, make some plot. So maybe you say, I'm going to plot final fit dollar residuals. Right, so you get some plot of the residuals. Hey, that's pretty cool to see. But then when I rerun this, or you share this with someone and they try to run it, they're going to run into an error. This object is not found because, well, really what we're after is model underscore 0. Right, so now we've got something that can actually work, and now if I hit Control Shift Enter, it runs the entire script, starting by clearing everything out and then doing everything. Right? And because we've sort of crystallized everything we need, we've taken something from a bunch of lines and from double checking and from displaying a bunch of information on the console, and we've gone down to just being able to go through and go directly from setup to importing data manipulations, a little bit more setup, getting a model, getting a result, and nothing more than we need. All right, let me, as long as I'm here and as long as I'm taking way too much time, you can stop listening to me at this point, but let me just go ahead and show off where our markdown gets useful. So it's customary to have the setup block. So I'm going to call source, and I'm going to load in script 0 from this same folder, right? So we're still, everything's nicely organized. So what is it we're looking at? We're looking at student loans and stuff, right? So blah, blah, blah. Is there a lorem ipsum? I wonder if there is. That'd be really cool. I feel like I might have heard something like that. Something, well, whatever. We don't need to create lorem ipsum text. But this is just going to bug me. Whatever, right? Lorem ipsum. We put in some text, right? Whatever. You're telling your story. You're doing this stuff. And then you can do stuff like, say, and so we model contemporaneous effects, yada, yada, yada. So when we run script 0, we're going to end up with this model 0, and we can do something like call summary of model underscore 0. Now Control-Shift-K is what we want to knit this R markdown. It's going to create this HTML text. So we've got this code in the background that sets everything up. We start telling our story. Where'd I go? We start telling our story, blah, 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 and then our model, and then we show the code that we need to show, and we get the results that we get out of that. But whatever else, you put in another code, you can say, let's plot model underscore 0 $ residuals. Rerun that. And now we've got this updated version. So now we can kind of go back and forth from the code to talking about the underlying problem. This is a really cool thing to do. It's a good way to talk about and present your results. I started learning R. I haven't stopped learning R. I started learning R a decade ago, something like that, before R Markdown really became a thing. And I really like Markdown as a format. And R Markdown is, of course, a great idea. But I kind of tend to default to these scripts, right? So I kind of think of this as something where I could, in principle, just double click on the file and have it run and have it update results. And sometimes that's the right way to organize things. But if you're doing a presentation, R Markdown is a really good way to do it. But the way to take advantage of it, let me copy all of this. The way to take advantage of it is to do your setup, right? So in this case, you've got the relevant code in an RMD file that you can share. And this is a really important thing. You can share your work, but with this, the basic setup is that when we knit it together, we're going to get a nice presentation, but we're going to hide whatever code we need to hide. There's some settings to figure out to make that work properly, but in this case, we run this setup code, but we don't include it in the document. But someone who has this file, they're going to be able to open up the file and see the code that you did to set this up. And so when they see this residual plot, they're going to say, hey, but what about something else? Maybe something else needs to be fixed for this to work for whatever reason. Let me just show one last thing. I want to take advantage of that date thing. So if I do model underscore 0 and I pipe that into, I'm going to C-bind this onto data. No, of course. Model underscore 0, sorry, residuals. Huh. Well, whatever. I'm not going to worry about that. So, long story short, your underlying problem was a minor one. It was a silly minor one. It was just literally missing a thing. Which I will tell you before I make you watch this entire video. But if you made it this far, here we are. You had a little problem, a little missing thing, but along the way, I just did a little bit of cleaning, a little housekeeping for you, and hopefully showed you some stuff that will make your life a little bit easier. Now, like I said, with Pac-Man, this is great if you're sharing with someone who already has Pac-Man installed. But, you know, the format you gave it to me with, you know, all this long list of libraries. If you do library tidyverse, that captures a lot of them. The other ones, you don't necessarily, I guess it's a context dependent thing. If you're sharing with someone who who you have reason to believe is going to be expecting to run your script with access to certain packages, you do things differently than if you're just, say, sharing out. But now I'm nitpicking. So long story short, small error, but along the way, hopefully I've shared a little bit of helpful wisdom on this. This is not stuff that's unique to me, but this is stuff that I have been learning slowly the hard way because it's not super easy to formalize. All right, hope that was helpful. I'll talk to you in the future.